It's 2023, and the MMO scene slowly rumbles back into action as we now look ahead towards the potential releases for the upcoming year, those in alpha and beta, or those simply coming out of the woodwork once again. Today's video looks at Throne and Liberty, one MMO that I've previously looked into, but I haven't really been keeping up to date with the developments more than a passing interest. The MMO itself doesn't fall into the usual category of genres that I tend to follow in terms of MMOs, but it does hold some pedigree in being the spiritual successor to the Lineage franchise in all but name. But with this in mind, the past few months have brought a few remarkable updates that I believe will shape the perception of the game, which I intend to explore in today's video. But without delay, let us dive into the potential that Throne and Liberty has put on offer, and see what elements we can pull and discuss today. Bringing ourselves back into December of last year, the developers released an explanation video on their core design concepts, but don't take my word for it, as the developers provided this little snip down below. Any MMO is a naturally dedicated undertaking, and Throne and Liberty is no exception. But in a rather charming way, the developers have been able to break up their game's tenets using the name of the game itself. Throne being a representation of the ideals of player versus player elements and all its varieties. Liberty being elements such as player versus environment and other world-based features, with even the "and" having a reference to how the designers intend to link the two dividing principles above and make the game a cohesive experience. But taking Throne into more detail, it isn't the case that PvP is present and is active at all times. PvP appears to be an element in which players can prepare for, with most of the world being safe. These areas in which PvP will appear are noted in advance. As a result, PvP is an entirely opt-in system. These areas and events are also ought to be on a scheduled basis, so no player should feel as if they're forced into the content or be taken by surprise. Those who do not wish to engage with the opportunity then are able to plan in advance to avoid the area in question. Guilds will also have PvP content in the form of seeking out stones throughout the map, which will then provide them with bonuses after being captured. And this idea of seeking out things and moving through the world in terms of PvP also then flows into the idea of liberty. The idea of liberty or freedom as a concept for an MMO is a usual sort of trope, and Throne and Liberty has made a concerted effort into putting this to the forefront. And from their own words, the world of Throne and Liberty is the primary function of this design, and when they mean the world, they truly do mean the world. Ideas such as dungeons having multiple tiers, with the ability to traverse them at different stages, is noted. They also mention that descending straight down to the lowest level of a dungeon is also possible and is a potential for what happens in the game. They also make reference to vertical travel, an element that we've seen in previous videos and content releases, showing that players might have the ability to traverse the world rather than just simply running to their destination. This is beneficial, especially with how the world is meant to be a living, breathing entity. Situations such as the weather changing or in-game events may cause the game world to transform depending on these numerous factors. Coupled with the above, the development team stresses the ideals of allowing players to make their own adventures in a world filled with backstory and lore. It is likely that experiencing this with their friends, compatriots, guildmates, or enemies is the true idea of liberty, to make their own stories to follow the gameplay. And make no mistake, the team hasn't forgotten about a slew of other quality of life extras that will help bring the game together. The developers have done so by announcing that they are designing the game for both PC and console releases from the outset, inclusive of UX and UI updates, which also shows a willingness to engage all markets equally and at the same time. It can be considered questionable to release on all platforms at the same time, depending on the amount of issues that can arise from the limited exposure to testing, and this is especially the case with how fickle that MMOs can be. However, the team has stressed that one of the primary thoughts for this section relates to optimization, and in which they have promised that they ensure the game will run as smoothly as possible due to their efforts to combat any potential errors. We did get some additional footage, released shortly after this developer dialogue, in which it did show a good amount of the game elements in play. Despite it being a curated, short experience, it does show this element of polish to support this statement. All in all, the design choices and the way that they've presented these tenets in the form of the title of the game is quaint, but this last section ties into one of the more recent developments for this upcoming MMO. And what may be this development, one might ask? Well, it has recently been announced by NCSoft that Amazon Games will be handling the publishing for Throne and Liberty across the Americas, Europe, and Japanese zones, providing the firm with another MMO to their publishing roster. Some of you may know Amazon Games as the publisher and developer of New World, alongside being the publisher for more recent sort of releases such as Lost Ark to a wider Western audience. Amazon Games have been known semi-infamously for the state of release of New World. Not only did it launch in a poor state for content, it was also controversial over the elements of numerous game-breaking glitches and economy-breaking exploits. With the release of Lost Ark, whilst they were only dealing as the publishers of the game, they still had issues regarding the release of content, alongside battling numerous other issues with bots, the economy, and others that made it difficult for genuine players to progress the higher tiers of content. Taking this in mind, it would be interesting to see what depth of control that Amazon Games will have in relation to how they schedule or deal with updates, dealing with the implementation or patches, or if they're solely dealing with the localization elements for the game. One of the many things about this arrangement is that the information surrounding Amazon's scope is fairly limited at the moment, which is why it begs the question. Coupled with their recent and open intentions to monetize their own IP, New World, with the form of a Game Pass, the scope and extent of monetization that may be pervasive in a Western release via Amazon is now one of the many questions that we will need to see answered. But what would be my conclusions from this current information? Firstly, the design ideas for the game and the video presenting them was a nice experience and a great snapshot into the design philosophy of the game. Whilst they are only presenting these ideas with limited evidence or footage, it is nice to see a team passionate about the ideas they are trying to put for their game firmly, and I only hope that in the end it is as they imagine. Naturally, with the scope of the project still ongoing, the matter of whether or not we will see a release date for the game sooner rather than later is one of the current hot topics for the game's audience. This has been promoted with a recent tweet from NCSoft themselves, citing that a recent final test has been conducted to ensure the quality of the game itself with all the relevant trappings. Whether or not we're going to see a release shortly, or perhaps towards the later quarters of the year, still remains to be seen, as no formal date has yet been provided. And now with Amazon Games' involvement, we can only gauge further questions in relation to their involvement into the scale of scope of release, and to the scale and scope of any potential Western monetization for the game. Are we to expect a similar line as New World, with a potential battle pass for future content, or a more traditional cash shop based experience that we might find with any other current day MMO of a similar type, or maybe perhaps even a blend of the two? My opinion on Throne and Liberty is that I'll await the Western launch to pass, giving some time for the potentially entry level hotfixes and niche tweaks that may aid and help with the experience. Whilst the game is interesting to me in a PvE premise, my lack of interest in the PvP aspects doesn't mean that I will find this game detrimental to my experience. My experience with Eastern MMORPGs such as Blade and Soul, Black Desert Online and others does however mean that the game will need to do more to win me over. And while I do not think that the game will be overly delayed, I do think and would be cautious regarding the element of Amazon Games' involvement being the publisher, although I will remain cautiously optimistic for a release in the Western audiences without too many issues. But what do you think? Are you looking forward to Throne and Liberty? Are you not? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you for watching my video today, and if you have enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel for more MMORPG related content in the future, wherein I may even give my thoughts on Throne and Liberty upon release. But until then, thank you for watching, let's meet again soon.